Welcome to Making It with Terry Woolman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Woolman.
His eyes roam skyward as she wheeled him in his chair. He twitched and he trembled while his fingers clawed at the air. He spoke in bits and pieces, his words in disarray, yet she listened carefully to all that he had to say. He must have been her bow from way.
Welcome to Making It with me, your host, Terry Woolman. I really appreciate you joining us each and every week. It means a lot to me and to our guest. You can find all of our episodes on entertalkmedia.com, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, any place where you can find a podcast, or go to terrywoolman.com to check out all of our episodes. And by the way, you can stream them or download them for free, so you can listen at your own leisure. I created this show to focus on what it takes to have a lasting career in the ever-changing landscape of the music business. Let me tell you about my guest today, Gino Vannelli. Born in Montreal, Gino Vannelli grew up in a family headed by his cabaret-singing father and a keen-eared mother. Instinctively drawn to jazz as a child, Vannelli studied drums and music theory for 5 years before adding guitar and piano lessons to his musical journey. The urge to compose words and music followed not long after, and at 14, Gino began his official singing career. Before his 17th birthday, Vannelli had signed with RCA Records of Canada, beginning a long and inspired career as a recording artist. Whether performing piano voice concerts in theaters, singing before symphony orchestras and concert halls, big bands, or a pop ensemble to throngs of enthusiastic fans, Gino remains impassioned and true to his art as ever. In his own words, the best works lie in the wake of reaching. Gino Vannelli, welcome to Making It.
Good to be here, Terry.
So nice to have you. And I want to talk a little bit about your growing up, but I want to start with a quote of yours first before we go into your background, and we'll take everybody through what's happening now with the current music that you're doing. So starting with your own quote, "There comes a day when an artist has to make a hard choice between two roads that lie ahead, knowing full well even the one he knows to be right will lead to a dark forest, leastways for the foreseeable future. Comes a time when success must be measured by a different yardstick." Why did you write that? And it seems like it kind of sums up your career and being a very unique individual artist. But tell me about what those words mean to you.
Well, as poetic as it sounds like one big great rationalization to me right now. I think it's basically just you do what you can best, and everybody's faced with choices. I don't see anybody that I've ever met. I've never met a man or a woman that didn't face some choice, and some choices are more visible to some people. They're made public. So for an artist, sometimes your choices are more public. You get fans that are disgruntled because you change direction, and new fans maybe that are happy and whatnot. But everybody in their daily life, as they grow older and as the decades pass, they find, that the choices they made at 29 no longer serve them at 49. And so it's all about choices. And as far as leading to dark forests, it is true that sometimes the intermediate future of your choice could not be so great, but deep down inside, you're in it for the long haul. And in the long run, it will have its rewards.
Did you have a plan, or have you just made a conscious effort just to be open-hearted and eyes and ears and heart open as you go through life to see what really is your next chapter?
Well, For me, it's looking for great examples, and sometimes the great models or examples are not exactly recording artists. They could have something to do with art, but sometimes they're just people have made great change, whether it be Churchill or Gandhi, which are two different, opposing, people in a sense. One stood for one thing, one stood for another thing, but in the end, they were impassioned about what they wanted to do, and they had this stick to it attitude, and their vision was manifested. So, whether it be the Lake poets or the early American poets, or some of the early jazz people, or some of the early lyricists like Langston Hughes, and I've always tried to model myself after people that I thought were just, eons above my capabilities or knowledge, and maybe I could, accumulate some knowledge along the way. And that, as you go on, you find that the years pass, and as you're trying to reach that summit that you kind of barely see, time goes by.
That makes great sense. And I'd like that you choose your mentors or role models as not just other artists, musicians, but people of vision and greatness. In some ways, both of those people that you've mentioned, Churchill and Gandhi, are in some ways selfless in their pursuit to make the world a better place. Is that part of what you've wanted to do along the career with your music, is just to move people and create joy and to challenge people?
Well, music was somewhat sacred to me as a child, because, from the early age, I was introduced to great music, whether it be, Coltrane and Miles and Dave Brubeck and Oscar Peterson and big bands and some great opera singers. Being introduced at 6, 7, 8 years old gave me such a high water mark to look up to, or to achieve, or to measure myself against, and falling so short, yet knowing that somehow I could reach close to it in my own way, just was a lifelong pursuit. In many ways, it brought realization. It brought a form, or a certain form of enlightenment, because you're trying to bring out only what's in the recesses of your own psyche, and you're trying to turn it into something real. So all the books written about, manifesting visions, whether it be Napoleon Hill or anybody, all the self-help, gurus. I mean, for artists, it's all about that every day. Every day you have inner visions, you have audio visions that you're trying to, pursue and carve out in the real world. And it's not only making those audio visions into real sound for real people to listen to, it's how to get it to them, and how to, pay the rent while you're doing it, and how to deal with, the real practical problems of life, like rent or a sick dog, while you're trying to reach this lofty, horizon. So, to me, it's the learning process has been far greater than any rewards, outward rewards, whether it be a nomination or, a gold record or something like that. Those are fine, but it's the realization, the openness of vision, understanding other people, understanding what it is to communicate with other people, what they're thinking, what moves them, what doesn't move them, and the changing moods of society. And because I've visited so many countries and been to so many countries, I many times would make it a point, to really delve into the culture of the country I was visiting, and many times stay over for weeks on end to further, understand the culture. I remember doing that a few years ago, well, 20 something years ago in Japan, when I was really trying to understand mystic Christianity, where it started, how it came, what influenced it, where the Old Testament came from, and all that. And when I was in Japan, I read through the Buddhist Bible, and I couldn't help notice all the similarities. And so I wanted to stay a little longer and visit with some monks in monasteries there was this one city by the sea, I forget the name of it, that I spent a week and a half and visiting with all the monks, and some great disappointments, crushing disappointments, and some very pleasant teas. Let's put it that way.
Well, full circle for that. I believe it was in 2000, you had the good fortune of being invited personally to the Vatican to perform for Pope John Paul. Did you have an opportunity to have a moment with him?
Oh yeah, I had an audience, full audience. I mean, I had an audience with him for 10 or 15 minutes. So did my wife, and so did my son. He was very gracious. That was part of the deal of singing for him, that I would get to meet him. And you know, I found, or I still find, that I'm very particular, even about people that are notably great, or that are notables in this world. And a pope is certainly a notable person, but he was the first pope I really wanted to meet, because I knew something about him. I knew what he had done during World War II, what he had done for Poland, and to really rid the world of the oppressive communism that was taking place, in Eastern Europe. And he really was a touchstone. He was really a key factor. And meeting him was kind of a thrill, because I knew I was meeting not only, a man with a skull cap and a cape, but I was really meeting someone who lived by what he professed.
I know that you're passionate about singing in different languages. Did you sing in Italian for him?
Yes. A song called Parole per mio padre, a word to my father.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That must have been a beautiful moment for both of you.
Well, yeah, ironic moment, because I had 103 temperature while doing the performance, and they had to shoot steroids right into my throat, and I could eke out one song, and it's on YouTube. I think it's on Google, and you'll I look pale as a ghost, but I got through it. And after the shot wore off, just a few hours later, I was sick like a dog, and I couldn't get out of Italy. I was there for a week laid up, and but I eked it out, and I got to perform for the Pope. So that's just, I was great 3 days in rehearsal. Then just a day before the concert, boom, it hit me. Just, you never know when you're on the road.
Right. How have you found, like, with all the touring that you've done over your years, like, ways to stay healthy on the road? I know you still are subject to the elements, but I also know that you take good care of yourself.
The motto on the road is, stay healthy or perish, because you're coming across so many particulars, so many disparate onslaughts that are you're facing every day, whether it be gobs of people in an airport or on an airplane, or someone sneezing right in your face, or so every day there's something happening, and so you have to keep that sort of elusive immune system, at its peak as much as you can. And it means getting your rest, and it means being a little bit of a prima donna sometimes, only doing what you really need to do, because, you've just flown 8 hours and you're just kind of socked. And so you need to get to the gig and just do exactly only what you should do, and not anything more, when you would love to do more. Mm-hmm. Then you realize after you perform for 2 hours, it's a good thing you didn't do anything more, because you needed that energy to do the show. Mm-hmm. So it's all those disciplines that you learn by default on the road. In the early days, we used to love to stay up late and, chat and do whatever. And it was fine at 21 years old, but as time wore on, that became a faux pas.
Right. But you adjusted, as we all do, as we get older, or hopefully we do. That's why we're still here talking, because we know that we can't, our bodies can't take the same kind of essentially abuse, from traveling is pretty, it takes a lot harder now than it used to be.
yeah, a lot more than it used to be. I mean, when I traveled a lot in the 70s, it was much easier, of course. You just
Right.
almost hopped on a plane, as you got to the airport. And many times you'd get there 25 minutes before. It's a 2 to 3 hour ordeal all the time. And international, it's minimum 3 hours. So it's a long day, and many times, I mean, flight delays, so on and so forth. Everybody knows what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do it for a living, you have to prepare for it. And sometimes, there really is no preparing for it. I mean, we're going to New York to do a gig, and the flight was canceled, so we had to take a red eye. You get there 11 or 12 o'clock the next day after doing the milk run, and maybe you can sleep for an hour, and then you got to go to sound check. So, I mean, there are those days where it's a tremendous pressure.
One of the stories I read about you that I think defines your focus and passion for music is the very first, this group called the Cobras when you were growing up in Montreal, and you had an opportunity to audition to play Wipeout by the Ventures on drums. Can you tell the story? Do you remember the story?
Yeah, it's pretty clear to me. I was coming home from school with a school bag on my back, and I heard some drumming and some guitars going. And it was a lineup of kids at a guy named Ricky Jacobson's house. He was on a corner street, a few streets from my house. And those had to be a lineup of at least 10 to 15 kids auditioning to be drummer for the Cobras. And they were all between 17 and 20 years old, late high school, drummers. And none of them could really cut it. Their time was bad. They didn't have the single stroke roll with the accents to play Wipeout. And it seemed like a no-brainer to me, only because I'd been practicing so much to Joe Morello and to Art Blake and Elvin Jones, and I was really into that kind of drumming. So I said, well, I'm going to wait my turn. So I was maybe the 20th guy, and finally, an hour later, it came to me, and I probably just nailed it, and they said, please join the group right there and then. So I got home, and I said, Mom, I joined a group. And, of course, she cussed me out for being so late. I was an hour and a half. And so we started playing some gigs, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And then my parents intervened when they wanted to do a tour of the entire province and have me on the road with a bunch of 20-year-olds, and they wouldn't go for that.
Mm-hmm. Was your dad a professional singer or just a? Okay. So it was in your wheelhouse to understand what it was like to just be out and perform.
Yes, because at a very early age, he quit when I was about 3 or 4, but I did perform a couple of times, and I saw what it was for someone that was close to me to be on a stage in the lights, wearing his best threads and all that kind of stuff.
And your mom was musical as well, or just encouraging?
Encouraging and more fearful for her sons than anything else, especially when I decided that I wanted to move to New York when I was just about 18. And I had no plans. I just hopped on a Greyhound bus and was going to, I knew I had some relatives and I was going to find them out, seek them out. And they lived somewhere in Queens Corona, and I got to have room and board for a week, but the problem was the board was their colleague's bed, and I just met people, kept meeting people in Manhattan. I'd wear my guitar, and as I met people, people wanted to hear, and I auditioned, and I ended up staying there for 3 or 4 months, and then going back, and then I lived there for about a year.
And so what brought you to LA? Because there's a beautiful story of you and your brother Joe ending up at the gates of A&M Records, which I love the tenacity of your willingness just to show up and make yourself known. So what inspired you? Did you come out with a plan to LA? Did you want to meet Herb Alpert, or you just came out, you just wanted to experience LA and try that?
No. Really the best plans are the ones that you don't expect and that you punt on. I think the only plan I did have was to form a group, make enough money to build a little studio, and make some demos that I really wanted to make, because studio time was so expensive. we couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't want to make money and just go blow it all in 2 studio sessions. So my brother and I saved about $4-5 grand. We bought the new Sony inline machine and a little board, and things were coming up in 1970, 71. Technology was starting to move. And so the inline Sony had 4 tracks. And so we made 5-6 demos and saved up enough money to get on a 707 and go to LA and stay in a $5 a day motel on Sunset Boulevard. And we had been there for 3-4 months, made all the record companies, knocked on practically every door. And the day before we had to leave, because we were simply out of money, I decided to take a walk. I stopped to an open church, and I fell asleep for 4 or 5 hours, early in the morning, and woke up kind of knowing what to do. And so I grabbed my guitar along with my brother, and we waited outside the gates of A&M for at least 3 or 4 hours. And then I suddenly saw Herb walking across the parking lot, and I ran through the gates, and the guard was chasing me and all. And Herb, was a little shocked by someone, accosting him out of nowhere. And finally we did meet and did talk, and he told the guard to back off, and he told me to come back in 30-40 minutes, and I played a bunch of songs for him, and he just said, "Welcome to the family," and that's what started my recording career.
I remember seeing you, and we talked about this in our previous conversations just on the phone, but I remember seeing you in Miami, and you and your band were magnificent. And part of what was magnificent about the performance was that it wasn't a traditional band. You were absolutely embracing the technology. And I believe that was wouldn't have been around 1972.
No, that was 70
later.
74 by the time.
74. Okay.
Yeah, we were trying to always look for different sounds, orchestral sounds that were not quite orchestral sounds, that were, sort of animated orchestral sounds with synthesizers and, of course, synthesizer basses and things like that. And it was so that some of the big companies, like Korg, wanted to know how we did it. And they came up with an 8-voice synthesizer by the time Brother to Brother rolled around. And we used to do our strings by recording a monophonic synthesizer called a mini Korg, a monophonic synthesizer, and overdubbing it, as many times as we needed to do to create a section. And many times it was 12 to 18 to 24 times. And they said they would create something for us that already had all the voices. And they did, and it was pretty good. But we found that it never gave you the same effect. There was something about the manual labor of overdubbing and the imperfections and the different vibratos and the different
velocity and the humanity of each performance.
Yeah, it just was never the same as a guy on a keyboard playing a string part. So all those 8-voice synthesizers, even Oberheim and a bunch of companies had them, they were kind of short-lived, because polyphonic synthesizers came out. By 1980, you just had your DX7s and your Mini Moogs and all that were polyphonic, so you didn't need to have these huge, monstrous sectional synthesizers that looked like a refrigerator.
Right. One of the things that enthralled me about the first live performance I saw of you back then was that you didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, you were absolutely embracing technology with having keyboard bass and these wonderful, lush, amazing sounds. But you also had a fantastic live drummer and percussionist. So you were combining the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. You can't forget, the basics. I always say that, in giving a master class, whether it be writing or songwriting or lyric writing, melody writing, singing, you always have to, the basics are pronounce the word right, sing it in tune. Okay, start there. And then you go from there and you can stylize. Same thing with writing. what is your song about? Are the chords interesting? Does the melody take you anywhere? And the same thing with a band. I mean, you can have all the sounds you want, but great players can bring out the sounds, could flatter the sounds a lot better. And great players playing really good songs, all the better. So
Absolutely.
basics had to be there, or else it wouldn't have gone anywhere. And first and foremost, it wouldn't have been really satisfying to me.
So when you released your first record, or actually, I'm more curious about this, your first album, Powerful People, that's when I became aware of you. Do you remember like the first day recording or the first session? Like, did you have a very clear vision? It seems like you did, of this direction that you were going sonically, artistically, conceptually, lyrically.
Yeah, so much so that Herb didn't want to be directly involved, because his inclination was to be very, very rootsy, and all live instruments, marimbas. He loved to use the word wooden. He used to say it always sounds wooden, and so that was his thing, but he also, he had a very, very broad understanding of other people's, inclinations too. And so he knew that I was looking for a new sound. And he said, I don't think I'm going to be on the day-to-day. I'll just be executive producer. You produce it. He said, I think you know where you're going. And that was, once I started producing myself along with my brother Joe, then I could never let anybody else, produce me, because it was like, really, the word producer is a strange word, because in the old days there were no producers. Was the arranger got together with the artist, he orchestrated, he usually conducted, the band, and then you had an A&R person who had a chart and who would make sure the engineer would mic up every instrument, and he would point out there's going to be a solo in bar 76 and so on and so forth. Producers only came around when there were no more of these A&R guys who could read through scores or charts. And producers came around more so when there was multi-track recording and when there's overdubbing, like the Phil Spectors and George Martins and all. So for me, I always thought if an artist really has his wherewithal, and really has a handle on his own material, his own voice, he ought to be able to produce himself, given the fact that he could take the time to stand back and listen and be really a harsh critic of himself, or at least a realistic critic of himself, and be willing to take other people's opinion. And so if I was willing to do that and really listen to what other people thought, and stand back and sometimes not listen to myself for a few days and then listen to the track later on and see how it hit me, I found that I could make the records I really wanted to make.
You're reminding me, when I first moved to LA in 1981, I met and befriended Henry Louie, who is Joni Mitchell's producer. And the definition of producer changes, obviously, with every project and every artist, or with artists like you and I that self-produce and are open to surrounding themselves with greatness and trusting the feedback. But I asked Henry, I said, how did you become Joni's producer? He said, I was her engineer. And there were not, like you had said, Gino, the producers hadn't fit into the schematic yet of, making music happen in pop music. And he said he was just engineering her, and they understood each other. When she asked for something to be more green, he actually had an intuition of what she meant by that. And he ended up producing all these beautiful albums with her and helped creating a safe space for her to create. And so it all, sort of set the tone for me of really looking at what a producer does or does not do. And I respect people who self-produce, especially the ones who do it well, because it does take, like you said, you've got to be, I wouldn't even use the word harsh critic, but just a true observer of what works and what doesn't for you, and where you're at your best and where you're not.
What you need is time and distance.
Yes.
Well, many times, like on this last record, on the Wilderness Road record, I would produce the track, and I was happy with the track, and then, put a final vocal on it. And I'd have to send it to myself, send an MP3 to myself the next day at home, just listen to it. I know right away if it's right or wrong. And because you're in a different place, you're in a different mindset, and suddenly you hear things that you're not hearing in the studio. The studio becomes a laboratory, and you're so focused on, on each little vial that you're forgetting what the temperature of the room is like. So for me, time and distance, listening to stuff at home, really helped me record the album that I wanted to record. And now we have more facility to do that these days, in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years. In the old days, it was harder to, in 1975, to record something and then go home and listen to it. You had to make tapes or a cassette, and the cassettes never really sounded good, and so it was a little bit more difficult to be an observer.
Mm-hmm. Wilderness Road, your latest album, is released on SRG Records, Sono Recording Group. Is that your label?
No, that's Claude Villani's label, and
okay.
I believe Brian McKnight is on that label. A few other Take Six is on that label. Really, some really good artists.
By the way, I love your collaboration with Brian McKnight.
Oh, on Brothers in the End?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very nice. They turned out nice.
Yeah.
I was happy with that.
So you have a recent Christmas song called Yet Something Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a video, and I encourage everybody to go find it. You gave a special thanks to Ken and Daylene Cahill, and who I don't know, but I'm wondering what the inspiration and backstory is on that song, because it looked like something that was very personal to you.
Yes, deeply personal. I was in a cafe that I love to go to all the time, and I brought my dogs, as I usually do, my two Aussies, and in came a woman wheeling a man in a chair, and he looked to be really the victim of either MS, Parkinson's, one of those degenerating diseases and debilitating diseases, and or a major stroke. But anyways, he was incapacitated, and the eyes of the crowd, the full room, were really kind of on him, because he had sudden outbursts of sounds and screaming, and he couldn't really control his laughter or his voice or even his movements. But I was fixed on her because she treated him as if everything was the same as it always was, as if he was the same man he always was, because she knew deep down inside he was. It's just that his motor movements had been seriously incapacitated. And her patience and her faith and her calm, her composure, was so that I said, now there goes, truly an unsung hero, because her days of caregiving are filled, with just attending to him. And that's not easy. And so I came up with the concept of the song right then and there, and real old school, just writing it on a napkin very quickly, because it came very quickly. And I knew that it would be something like life is cruel, there's no denying. In the end, nobody is spared, and yet something beautiful when love is there. And that's what it really is about. And so it's a direct story of a couple. Now, Ken and Daylene are my neighbors, and they decided they'd play the part, because I wanted to bring in a couple that was a caregiver and someone who had been stricken by some incapacitating disease. And first of all, not many people were willing to do it. Second of all, the ones that were willing to do it, it just looked to me that it would be embarrassing, or I don't know what it was. It just didn't feel right. It felt like it needed someone to play it. And that's why Ken's face is never seen, because I almost wanted him to be, I did want him to be anonymous. And I wanted the message, to resound. And that's what I think we accomplished.
I would say you did. I was moved by watching it, and thank you for sharing the backstory on that.
Sure.
It brings me to another question I wanted to talk about, which is your creative process, because there's a couple things in our previous conversations, just personally, that you've said that I found intriguing. One is just talking about the process of actually writing, but the other is talking about to seek and find, to really look at what you're seeking. And Can you talk about what that means to you to seek and find?
Well, seeking and finding. I mean, there's an old. If you read some of the pages of the Apocrypha or the Ancient Sea Scrolls or the Qumran, Gospels, depending on what you want to call it, the saying that Jesus says, not, he doesn't only say seek and you shall find. There's an addition to it. At first you'll be troubled, and then you'll be astonished, and then you can do amazing things or something like that. But like I say, there's an addition to it, that you may be troubled at first, but then you'll be amazed. And so I always kept that in mind. So it always made me very curious and very, very willing to go where angels fear to go. I mean, a long time ago, years back, I heard of the guy named Stanislav Grof, who was really into mind exploring through holotropic breathing. He's a Russian, psychiatrist who cured many people, and he was really on a path of trying to discover, how deep consciousness goes. And so I went to his house along with his then wife, Christina Grof, and they kind of put me through the paces, and I was gone for 14 hours. And it's a long story, but I knew something about myself after that 14 hours that I didn't know before that 14 hours. And then I had a friend who had a extra sensory deprivation tank, and I did that for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And at first,
I've done that as well. They create change.
Well, at first you do it for an hour, 2 or 3, but by the second week, I had been in the tank that last day for over 15 hours. And
wow.
Yeah. And you start to go. And you start to understand things about what great visionaries like Gautama and Christ and many of the Hindu, Krishnamurti and all that. You understand firsthand what they're saying. It's not like looking in the window and window shopping. You have the goods in your hand, and you're applying it. And so when you're in that deprivation tank, suddenly you see what people meant by the guardians of the gate. Who the hell knows what the guardians of the gate is? It's like some poetical, symbolic language. But you really realize that when Gautama was talking about the guardians of the gate, he was talking literally, that there are guardians of the gate, and they're all within us. It's just that you have a sliver of consciousness that with what you're dealing with every day, and once all of a sudden you tap in to that broad sea, that ocean that lies beneath you, you just take a little dip in that. You realize that, oh my God, it's this dark ocean of possibilities, and yet the brain and the body are programmed, to be here and not to go there. At least not in one felt swoop. And so in suddenly taking a skinny dip, in the ocean of the subconscious, the guardians of the gate, just really shook me up and shook me out of that tank so fast, because I was approaching what people would call either near death or death.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so what I'm saying is that a lot of the mystic teachings are really practical teachings. It's just that they're really kind of lofty. They're a little bit out of our reach, or we're not familiar with the reality or their everyday reality. But I was kind of determined to try to understand them and put them into an everyday reality. And that's why I developed the seek and find, mentality. And at a certain point, not to say that I gave it up, but I let it go a little bit, because I had some of the information that I wanted. Then I needed to work on what needed to be done in the here and now.
I understand. And to be in this world, you need to keep a foot in the world also.
Yes.
So
yes,
that makes sense.
But you need to practice, though. You see, it's not like you brush your teeth and you forget about it, right?
Yes.
The teeth need to be attended to every day. And same thing with your body, and same thing with your friends, same thing with your loved ones, your pets, and with your career, with the voice. I mean, I'm going to do 2 dates in Florida. I haven't been performing in a while. Now I'm starting to sing every day, and I'm starting with maybe 4 or 5 songs in the morning, and then skip a day. Next morning, 6 songs. Skip a day. Next morning, 7 songs. So build up my voice again. And it's the same thing with spirituality, if you want to call it spirituality, which is really a kind of a gross name for it. It's really it's self-knowledge, a form of gnosis, a form of self-discovery, a form of understanding who we are juxtaposed to everything else. And when you don't practice that, it goes away. Your consciousness narrows again. It's almost like a muscle that, like, if you do yoga and you're doing those, triangle pose, a downward dog, if you don't do it for 6 months, my God, it's really difficult to open up your shoulders again, because gravity tends to, close you up like a tulip. And yoga, is like the sun, coming out and says, okay, open up and get the body to, to spread out and open up so that your meridians could, open up and the blood flow could be better. And self-knowledge is like that. It tends to close up and become really laser-like if you don't keep it open. So that's why the seek and find kind of mindset is always there, but not as urgent as it was 25 years ago. But it needs to be there.
One of the things that you do is you teach master classes. Are they performance-based and songwriting-based, or are they spiritual-based and philosophy-based, or both?
Spirit and philosophy are a natural result of trying to master something.
Yes.
So if you try to be spiritual, you miss the mark. Spirituality is a natural outcome of being, of finding the truth and being the best you can be at whatever you choose. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're a poet, whether you're a gardener, there are things you need to know about your skills, yourself. If you want to push yourself to be the best you can be, you become spiritual, because you got to seek for what does not yet exist within you. And that is part of that. Maybe you get a droplet from the ocean of the subconscious. And so that's a natural outcome. So for me, the classes are all about being very pointed. If it's songwriting, it's going to be either the music part of it or the lyric part of it. And there are techniques to the writing of lyrics that are helpful. They cannot teach you how to write lyrics, but they can help you to get there. Singing, you cannot teach someone to be a great singer, but you can give them points, almost like bumpers on a bowling alley, in a bowling alley, and so that you can say, no, don't go there, watch your vibrato. The way you can pronounce this word to help you sing this word is this way. And so there are skills you can teach, and hopefully those skills will make someone that's good better. You can't teach someone who sings out of tune to be in tune. You got to have a natural ear. They can get better at it the more they listen to themselves, because it's a relative thing. Most people put on a pair of headsets and sing flat, only because the proximity of the speaker to your ear. And once you acclimate to it, then you learn to sing what you think may sound a little sharp in your head, but then you get used to it and say, oh, that's where it is. Okay, now that's dead center. But the classes really are, sometimes we branch off into philosophy, into a bit of spirituality. But it's a natural thing, like I said, because most people that come to the class have a dream deferred. There was one guy who came from Sweden who was really had the right stuff and was going to be the lead singer in going to join a famous rock group in the early 70s. And now he's older, and but the reason why he didn't is because he had a heart attack, and he had to give it up. And he became a very, very successful ad agency person in Stockholm, but he wanted to take the class, and he did so, and even wanted to record some, and so I produced a few things for him. But for him, his reason was to say, you know what, I could have done it and I could still do it. And he was really at rest and at peace with himself. So that's a spiritual aspect of it, that he came full circle, that the dream deferred had been now realized. So automatically, there's a sense of at least part of himself is completed.
Where can people find out about your classes or access to being a member?
Facebook. We're going to be announcing the classes probably in about a month from now. Summer classes. They're usually in August.
And do you do them nationally, internationally, or are they all based in the West Coast?
Many in Europe. When I lived in Netherlands, I lived there for 2 years. I did many master classes in universities and conservatories, and I found that when you teach 25, 30 people at once, it's not as effective. My classes are no more than 5 people at once. Mm-hmm. So there's really hands-on personal attention.
That's what I envisioned as you were telling me about it.
Yeah, it needs to be that way. I made it that way. And so, instead of charging, a lot of people charge, I don't know, whatever they charge for their master classes, and there's 20, 30 people there. Mm-hmm. You get not much out of it because you need to be there singing. You need to be before the mic, in front of the mic, performing, listening to yourself every day, improving slowly. And then suddenly, maybe by the 5th day, you go, oh, that's where I want to be. Now you pick it up from there when you go home, and hopefully you come back. If you do, you pick it up from where you left off. But I found that dealing with 5 students was a handful. It took the full 3-4 hours in the morning and in the afternoon.
Well, I think having the intimacy with a small group is absolutely the way to get the most out of the experience.
Of course, yes. And for me, it's more fun too.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Because I can do it in my studio, and I know the equipment, and I understand, how I can get the best out of either a vocalist or we have all the instruments there. So if someone's writing on a certain instrument, he can use whatever instrument he chooses.
After you left the Netherlands, which I believe was in 2009, you released a CD poetry book entitled A Good Thing, which I've been listening to the past week when I've been preparing for our conversation. And in addition to having a poetry book that you've written, you also published a book called Stardust in the Sand. So mm-hmm. You've explored yourself as a storyteller.
Yes.
And one of the things that I read about, and I haven't read Stardust in the Sand, although I listened to A Good Thing for years. I really love it. And I love reading the poetry on its own. But the last chapter of Stardust in the Sand is called Godlings and Feet of Clay. And you take a more humorous approach to your writing.
Yes, it's all the artists that I met over the years and how awkward the moments were. And they were nothing like one would think, nothing romantic, nothing, no clarity or revelations, or anything like that. It was just these moments where people are saying stupid things, thinking particular things that really have nothing to do with really what you should be thinking or saying at the time. Sometimes just complete silence, or sometimes something funny, like with a few of the artists that I think it was Billy Joel, I met. Now I'd seen him the night before in a club called Paul's Mall, and it was an awful place. I mean, the urinals were leaking from upstairs, and so you take a drink, and it smelled literally like piss. And with this guy on stage, doing a few songs, and he was just mean mouthing the audience and cussing everybody out, and just a piss poor attitude. And I just looked at my manager at the time and I said, I don't think he's going anywhere. That's something to deal with. The next day, he was staying in the same hotel, and next day I was introduced to the singer, it's Billy Joel, and that was in 1975. So that was a really good lesson for me, because you just don't know what powers a person's engine. Sometimes anger powers a person's engine. Sometimes love does. Sometimes kindness does. Lots of emotion. When it's a real emotion, you'd be surprised how much fuel, how much combustion you can get from that sentiment.
That's so interesting, Gino, because I'm always fascinated that some artists, and not just artists, but people in life, business people, politicians, teachers, with everything, humans, some of them are propelled through life by love and compassion, and some are propelled by anger and self-indulgence. And those people are equally successful. And I'm always fascinated by how they both work. But the word that you're using, that they're fueled by, kind of adds some clarity to it for me, because it never really makes sense to me how people that are selfish and mean can be as successful or more so than people that are going through with a compassion and a self-awareness of trying to be the best they can.
Well, the problem with what you're looking at, though, Terry, is that you're looking at success like you're looking at the Empire State Building from the sidewalk, from the streets. And when you're up there, looking at the streets below, you realize that you're still the same person. So what I'm saying to you is that although a person can be fueled by anger or fueled by kindness or fueled by egolessness, or like Oscar Wilde, fueled by pure ego, they have found their fuel, and it will make their engine burn and make their engine go and go fast and go for a long time. But the true success is the artist that has been composing or making his mark on the world. How does he feel after the mark has been made? And if you study everybody's life, you study how Oscar Wilde ended up, you study how people who are really, who are fueled by anger, what did they do, and how did that anger affect their private life, and eventually their health, eventually their sentiment, eventually their life. That's where the real measurement of success is. So if you look at what you do as who you are 100%, then you'll look at it, well, I don't care what it is, I'll just be fueled by it. But if you look at what you do as part of your life, or as an outcome of your life, or as a function of your life, then not being in that constant angry state, hostile state, whatever state you want to be, because even an ego state, a full onboard ego state, is very painful, because you're constantly having to separate yourself, you constantly have to boost yourself, you constantly have to defend yourself. It's not pleasant. But if you're in a kind of state where you're kind of cool and yet you can be powered, that's the state to get into. And that's what I was looking for all my life. I was looking on that pure state of just making the music for its own sake. And it took many, many, many years to get there. And I really can say I write every day. I write lyrics every day. I write on the piano, guitar every day. I just write because I love doing it. And it makes me no less angry or no less kind if I have to be. But to be constantly in that state is just a tremendous, burden. So when we look at the artists in terms of their work, in terms of their success, sure, yeah, that, the angry young man, or the young Turk or whatever, is cool. But you look at it later on in their lives, because, life is all about here and now. We can talk about my career in 1975, 1980, or this and that, but that doesn't exist anymore. There are works, there are songs, and there are works that you can kind of make you remember that is kind of fun. But to the artist, to you, to people, in general, it's here and now. How do you feel now? Are you happy now? And generally, if you're not happy, as you get older, you can't create anymore. You can't. Not being happy as a young man, you still got power. You could turn the unhappiness into fuel. As you get older, maybe about 45, 50, that anger just makes you look terrible. Just puts a permanent scowl on your face. You have a scowl on your face when you're 20. It's kind of cute. But a man of 50 with a scowl on his face, nobody wants to look at.
Agreed.
You see how it changes?
Yes, I do. Gino, before we get to our closing questions, because we're heading towards the end of our conversation, which I'm absolutely enjoying, what has changed about your perspective in life as you've gotten older? Or has it just been a gradual arc towards the clarity in which you're speaking now?
Well,
I mean, is there any like a belief system that you had when you were 6 or 20 that you've really done an about face on or modified?
yes, of course. I was raised a Roman Catholic because I went to Catholic school. We were Italian, growing up in Montreal, and Montreal was basically a Catholic city. Some of the English-speaking population were Protestants. In the late 50s and 60s, school was generally parochial, and especially in Quebec. So learning religion, having to go to church, the school taking you to church once every other Thursday or something like that was mandatory. So of course that it's mandatory is kind of like having to force feed someone. So if you're going to force feed me, I'm going to want to know what you're doing. And so I had questions, and none of the priests or the brothers could ever answer my questions. So in a sense, I threw the baby out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. But I was a believer, but not their kind of believer. And I didn't know how. I didn't know why, because I didn't understand the history of religion. I didn't understand what element of the humanities they belonged to. I didn't understand what part of history they belonged to. I didn't understand religion as a ruling class. I didn't understand religion as a faith. And so there's all these aspects of religion. And then at one point, I made it a point in my life to understand it. So I went back to college and I took up the humanities and theology. And I studied the religions of the world, at least trying to understand where they came from. Their inception. What did the Mesopotamians have to do with ancient Judaism? What did it have to do with Christianity? Who was Martin Luther, and what were the 39 Articles of Faith, and how did that happen? And then how did it splinter even further? And so on and so forth. And when did Islam come about? And why did it come about? Who's Ishmael? And what does he have to do with Jacob? And da 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 da. I mean, it's an amazing study. It's a real study of culture and history. That religion is a natural reflection of our deep geographical culture and our longing to build a bridge with the unknown. And then, taken the wrong way, once people sort of get an idea that they built that bridge, now they feel it is on their shoulders to teach others, even if you have to kill them. And that's been the story of religion. And that's been the beauty and the destruction and the tragedy of religion, that it has as much death and destruction as it has insight. But there is insight, tremendous insight. I mean, when you look at, when you understand, say, Buddhistic teaching, the sutras, and the Eightfold Path, mm-hmm. And everything Gautama taught and all the tradition, how Theravada became Mahayana Buddhism and so on and so forth. And you compare and contrast that with the Old Testament and then with the New Testament, and you find the cultural similarities. Like, for instance, when in the commandments, when Moses comes down with the commandments, and the first couple of commandments are basically God saying, you got to respect me, you got to love me, you got to believe in me, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people kind of take exception with that. They go, what is that? What authority does that invisible person have over me? But when you study Buddhistic teaching, the correlative to the first commandment is all life is sacred. Well, then if you have the right perspective of God and you see God as the universe, the mind of the universe, how things grow, how things develop, how things evolve. Why do you cut yourself and why does it heal? Why do you plant a seed and how come the tree grows? So when you have this respect and this veneration for life, and you automatically go to all life is sacred, then you build a bridge between cultures. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to understand religion from a cultural and historical point of view. And that is what's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helped me tremendously to understand the world that I'm in and the world around me and why people think the way they do. And you can see it automatically in people when they're really impassioned by their belief, and when that impassioned belief negates other beliefs, then you realize they have some work to do. And it's really a miracle to me, a miracle of consciousness, when I see someone who's a devout Christian, and even Orthodox Christian, whether it be a Baptist or a Methodist or Presbyterian, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he or she has an open mind towards all other belief systems, including atheists or agnostics or whatever.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And when you see that, you say, well, now, there is a solid footing. There is a person who truly believes. Because a person who doesn't truly believe wants everybody to believe what they believe to affirm their own or to validate their own opinion.
Right. They have a healthy curiosity that they bring into their perspective on life and everything.
No, what I'm really meaning to say is that those who would condemn others for a belief system other than theirs is because there's something about their belief system that is failing them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that when your belief system does not fail you, it leaves you open.
Right.
And when you're open, you're free to believe what you want to believe. And then you kind of say, well, whichever way you want to go, brother, it's up to you.
Right.
But what was important to me is to understand it, why it exists, how it was built.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at all the things we're looking at, today, the problems, whether it be political problems or cultural problems, social problems. I mean, if you don't lie, if you don't steal, if you don't cheat, if you don't murder, you're pretty much, you got a good solid foundation.
Mm-hmm. I'm
talking about a society, but a society that, for instance, covets thy neighbor's goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it would be turf wars, or whether it be, keeping up with the Joneses, or whether it be, I want the government to go confiscate this guy's goods because I want them. All that has something to do with learning, deep learning, higher learning. This is what the religions of the world, at their best and at their outset, profess, and then they get warped. There's an old joke, right, which is Moses is walking with the tablets and he trips, tablets fall, they're a million pieces, right? He goes, oh, well, I know them anyways, so I'll be able to, dictate them by heart. And the devil was following Moses close behind, and the devil gets on his knees and starts gluing them together. And then someone passing by, asked the devil, what are you doing with all those little pieces of stone? And he looks up, he says, I'm going to organize it. Well, something happens in the organization of religion that kind of corrupts it, because it needs to calcify into one solid piece. And then to keep that solid piece alive, then you got to become a ruling body, and then you got to be in some way an oppressor. And that's what the history of most religions are. And for religions to come out the other end of it, it takes a lot. And that is part of what we were talking earlier. And that is part of some of the great artists have done. Help us utilize those belief systems to our advantage, to create something beautiful and to make our time worthwhile while we're here.
Yeah. To make our time worthwhile while we're here. I'm in complete agreement on that. All
those beliefs, Barry, are there so we have we have an even playing field. You cannot create, you cannot raise a family, you cannot even think of some of the anecdotal things that artists or writers or poets think about if you're worried for your life every second.
Mm-hmm.
If you're being invaded by a foreign army, or if there's chaos in the streets, or if there's insurrection, or if there's disease everywhere, or there is, humanity's been through it. The reason why the Renaissance came about is that there was relative peace at that time, and there was technology, new ideas coming around, and so it was almost like the air was ready
Mm-hmm.
for new thought.
Right.
And so, at its best, spiritual thinking, that means having regard for other people. The two laws of loving God, loving life, if you want to say, and loving your neighbor as yourself. If you have those two things, you could at least make a life. If people have complete disregard for each other, it's very difficult to make a life. You're dealing with defense every day of your life. You have to protect your children, protect yourself, protect your loved ones, and therefore you're always in defensive mode, and you can't create. You can't create something beautiful, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I have found, that, for instance, our founders, the forefathers of America who wrote the Constitution and all, they were deep believers, and they couldn't write the Constitution if they didn't have their belief system. It didn't exist. Do you know that people were called out throughout history subjects? We were the first people to call people citizens.
Hmm.
We were the first people that said every individual has a right. That never existed. Never existed. It was always collective thinking. And so if you didn't belong to a certain group, you were screwed. We were the first country that said, no, every man has a right. These are your God-given rights. And what we meant by God-given rights, it's your natural rights. And so when you start to understand how those things come together with the history of religion, the history of trying to make a better world, it gives you profound respect for the people whose shoulders you're standing on.
Indeed.
I said enough.
Yeah. But you said it well. I have 3 closing questions, but in a sense, you've already answered the first one. But I'll still give it to you because I give it as a 2-part question. I ask all of my guests at the end of the show, since this show is called Making It, what does making it mean to you? Which I believe you've already expressed quite clearly, not just personally, but as a culture, as a humanity. But you're welcome to answer it more directly if you want to. And the second part of that question is, can you share 3 tips for success that have driven your career?
Well, making it is a little bit like Buddha's third trial. Mara was the equivalent of the devil, the tempter. And in his third temptation, when he said, I'm going to give up, being who I am, give up being a prince, Mara said, well, think of what other people will think about you. You'll be a disgrace. You'll be the laughing stock. And Buddha said, I don't care anymore what people think about me. All I want is the truth. Now, if a man or woman could get to a point where he says or she says to herself, I really don't care what people think about me. I'm going to do what I think is right. I'm going to follow my path. I'm going to hopefully seek and find the truth. And it could be the truth about anything. I mean, it could be what you do, your life, your family, or your work, or whatever it may be, because it's not one thing. But there is a certain quality about that thing that has truth. And so for me, making it is to be able to say, well, I'm kind of happy doing what I'm doing, and I'd like to be as successful as I can, but I won't sell myself short. Mm-hmm. And if people don't consider me successful or cool or whatever it is, I'm okay with that. And that's a strong measure, because every day you can wake up and be a little bit joyful and get to your work and get to what you're doing, and with some zeal and some energy. Because let me tell you something. When we talked about anger and happiness, joy has got a lot longer lasting fuel than anger does. You burn out of fuel very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And the second part of your question is
3 tips for success that have driven your career.
Look short term, look medium term, and look long term. What is short term may not exactly be right for long term or medium term, mid term. You have to take care of the day, get through the day. My son has a company that he's into movement, athletic movement. It's a visionary company, but it's a long-term thing. It may take 10 years, for that company to really come to full fruition. But he's got the rent to take care of, and he's got, his loved one, to be with. And so he needs to live now. And then he needs to think about, maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, how is he going to get himself to that point? And then always with the one eye on the long run. How does this impact the future of what I really want to do? So for people looking to make it in music business, it's like, keep yourself alive by something that doesn't destroy your soul, but may not be exactly what you want to do. But keeping your eye on the prize. And that prize would be, I want to make music. If you're in music, I want to make music in a way that is so satisfying to me that hopefully it's going to be satisfying to millions of others. So in the interim, you practice on a daily basis. You practice. And you listen to those that are better than you, because they will teach you. And in the midterm, you try to put a band together. Try to get yourself out there performing. And then long term, hopefully you have years and years of success. Hopefully there's a pivot somewhere where it's sort of, the rubber meets the pavement.
Speaking of your son, what's your son's company and website? Why don't we give a shout out?
Atheq, Atheq, Atheq. Very, very talented kid. And his, again, was experiential because he had a car accident. And they told him he'd be in a wheelchair. And he studied the history of movement. And it's an incredible study. He went all the way back to the Olympics of the Grecians and the Romans, and how the athletes moved and how they saved themselves from incredible injuries, healed themselves from injuries. And he applied it and healed himself. He's actually playing basketball now when he was basically in a wheelchair.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And first of all comes the mindset that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so his accident was very, very, very incapacitating. But he found this equal and opposite reaction. In other words, he learned to access muscles around the damaged area. And he applies and utilizes those muscles. And it's made him a fully functional human being.
I'll be going to that website this afternoon.
It's quite something,
Yes.
what he's discovered, and he's already got some up and coming 18-year-old athletes that he's helped already in minor basketball leagues here but we talk all the time because he wants to know. I mean, how did I do it, and what was I thinking at 20 years old, and so on and so forth. And I said, there is really no schematic, there is no manual on how to make it. But I said, those are the things you need to apply. Don't get yourself to the point where because if you're poor right now, you're going to be thinking like a poor man, and you're going to be desperate. You're going to do stupid things for your company. I said, get yourself so you're a smart guy, earn a living, eat well. And meanwhile, you keep watering your future plans. And he's doing that, and I'm very happy with him. And meanwhile, he's living a life, because you can't be living for that one thing, because it may not happen for you when you think it may happen, or it may not happen the way you think it's going to happen. Meanwhile, live your life. have your friends, have your loved ones. And it's always nice to go have a nice lunch with someone, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, you might have answered my closing question, Gino, which is of no surprise. Go ahead.
It's small and big. Think small and think big and think medium. That's the best thing. I mean, I'm talking about to fellow musicians now. This is the whatever you want to call it, suggestion I'm offering, and don't be afraid to be small. That's
yes,
but don't be cheap. There's the faux pas. Don't sell yourself short. Always integrity, no matter if it's small. If you're waiting on tables, if you're a busboy, if you're sweeping, there's an integrity to that, and the integrity is doing it right.
Absolutely.
And you always maintain that, because that's the fulcrum. That's the thing you keep with you as you go.
My final question, and I think you just really clearly answered it, is at this point of your life, with everything that you know to be true, what would you tell your younger self? I believe you just answered that question.
Yeah, I always knew that, though. It's just a question. It's not always a perfect application.
How did you know that? I mean, did your mom and dad teach it to you, or you just sort of saw it as you were young? I'm talking about being a kid. You just observed and had an understanding that where the truth was in that.
I always knew the truth was somewhere where I knew it was above me, and it was just out of reach all the time. And the truth always kept rising a little higher as I reached a little higher. And but I knew it was there. And it was, as I was reaching for it, it made me a better person. It schooled me. It made me more of a learned person, a more empathetic person, to understand, where other people are coming from. And in some ways, it made me intolerant of people who will not. By extreme willful volition, who will not respect other people. It made me intolerant of them, whereas I would be more tolerant only because I'd allow myself to be trounced on, in younger years. And once you say, no, that's not going to happen anymore, then you recognize it and you won't take it. Not that you got to do battle with them. You just step out of their way, and they'll whiz by anyways.
True.
Because they have their own interests at heart only. So anyways,
yeah.
It's not that important.
Is there anything on your mind, just final thought, that you would like to share with our listeners?
Oh, I'm, the small thing is that I'm working on for our live show, I'm working on a new arrangement of The River Must Flow, because someone showed me another version of it that they did in Italy, and I kind of liked it. And not that I would do that version, but suddenly I had a kind of brainstorm, and it's really, that's what I'm heading to right now in the studio to finish it. Because I mock everything up for the band, and then I create charts and all that, and so they hear how it should be performed, and then we do it live.
I look forward to hearing that.
Okay. Well, great talking, Terry.
It's really a pleasure. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and perspective and journey with such clarity. I really appreciate it. And everybody, GinoVannelli.com. Is that correct?
It's GinoV.com.
Say that again.
GinoV.com. And of course, Facebook. I'm pretty active on my Facebook page.
And again, we'll post that on the website as well. So go check out everything, Gino. I really encourage you to.
All right.
Gino, it's really been a pleasure. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for the hour. And thank you, Gino. We appreciate you.
Okay. See you later, Terry.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Woolman.